If you're ready to knit your first sweater, it's finally time to cast on. Welcome to the first video in our Rumi Raglan knit along. So at the beginning of the pattern there are some notes and it talks about creating a contrast for the cast on edge. So we're actually, if you're using two strands together, we're only going to use the bulky weight strand to cast on our stitches. Very straightforward. We're going to use the long cast on method, which I have a separate video for, and we're going to cast on 80 stitches onto our needles. And we're going to be using the smaller needles because we're going to be doing the ribbing at first. Ribbing creates a nice stretchy edge so you can get your sweater over your head or to have it around the arms and the bottom of the sweater. Okay, so I'm just going to use my bulky weight yarn. I create my slip knot and then I'll cast on my stitches. So 1, 2, 3. Once you have cast on all your stitches, you're then going to join in the round. Now I have a separate video for this as well. I always like to cast on one extra stitch on my right needle and then I will slip the first stitch that's on my left needle onto my right. And then that extra cast on stitch, I will simply slip it over the stitch that I have moved from my left needle to my right needle. So I have essentially bound off that extra stitch that I added, therefore decreasing back to the amount of stitches that I should have. Now that I've done that, I need to place a stitch marker. And what that does is it tells you where the beginning of your round is. Otherwise, it'll be very hard to keep track of how many rows that you have actually knit. So I will place it on my right needle, and the first stitch on my left needle is the first stitch of my round. You also want to make sure that the tail that hangs down from when you've cast on isn't too short because you're going to be weaving that in at the end. Okay, now the first round, according to the instructions, is simply going to be a 1x1 rib. So we're going to alternate knit stitch, then purl stitch, and do that the whole way around. And we're going to do it in our bulky weight yarn. So we'll do that just for one row, and then we will introduce our second strand if we are using it. Okay, I finished my first round of ribbing. You want to make sure that you end your round on a purl stitch. Otherwise you'll have an odd number of stitches and not the amount that you originally casted on. And then you'll have two knit stitches next to each other, which is not what we want. Okay, so the instructions say for the second round and for the next 2.5 inches of work, you're going to add in your second ball of yarn if you're using it. So the first stitch is a knit stitch. So I'm going to knit that. I'm going to wrap my first piece of yarn around and I'm going to hold it there while I then put my second piece of yarn on. So I put that on, I hold both of the pieces of yarn together and then I simply knit stitch. And now I'm going to continue with my 1x1 rib until I have done 2.5 inches, and that will be the collar. So I'll see you in the next video to start the yoke.